Radiri, si Dr. Pratt, I crediti esti. Benvenuti in Whitesburg, nella contea di Letcher, in Good morning, Dr. Butchie, Dr. Radiri, Mayor Pratt, and honored guests. Welcome to Whitesburg, Letcher County, and to Kentucky. Per favore, scusami, parlo pochissimo italiano, guido ora passerò all'inglese. I'll continue in English since I don't speak much Italian. Okay. I've been asked to speak today about the history of our county and the city of Whitesburg, and I cannot do that without speaking about family. The Appalachian Mountains were the first frontier of the United States, and when Kentucky was formed in 1792, this part was largely empty of Europeans. The first wave of immigrants to settle here were old colonists, England. They were English, Scots, Ulster, Saxons. Families came with other families they knew in the old world, or who they met on the 3-month journey across the ocean. And those families settled together here in America. Most of the people here followed the Great Wagon Road that began in Pennsylvania, ran down through Virginia, and traveled all the way to North Carolina. They lived together in the Yankee River Valley of North Carolina, and when it was time to move on, they moved together to Kentucky. In 1803, Spencer Adams wanted new adventures, new land, and he formed a wagon train. A handful of families passed through Pound Gap, 20 miles from here. And the weather caught up to them. They wintered here, and by spring, they had decided to stay. They formed the first settlement in what's now Letcher County, about 2 miles upriver from here at Mount Mercury. By 1810, 100 families lived along the North Fork Valley. Adams, Webb, Kraft, Holbrook, Caldwell, Brown, Whitaker, Lewis, Dixon, Ison, all came through Pine Mountain and settled here. Most came from the Yadkin River. By 1842, there were so many families here that the state legislature created a new county called Letcher, named for the Kentucky governor, and Whitesburg, its county seat, named for the Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, who was from Clay County, which we had been a part of at one time. But in less than 20 years, the Civil War came, and what had been a promising location at the headwaters of 3 rivers was ravaged by advancing soldiers from both sides, many of whom were neighbors or related to the people they then called enemies. In 1863, a soldier during the U.S. Civil War described Whitesburg as, quote, not much of a town, little more than a hospital for the sick and wounded. It sort of stayed that way until the last boundary change in 1885, when Knott County was split off from Letcher. Around that time, Letcher County began to aspire to something greater. In the 1890s, they began building. Families began to reunite. The civic-minded patriarchs began to forgive their kith and kin, and they had faced across the battlefield. Somewhere along the way, someone recognized that there were huge deposits of coal under our feet, and land speculators began buying up property. People like John C.C. Mayo, and on a much smaller scale, J.H. Frazier, here in town, began buying up mineral rights to sell to Eastern industrialists and right-of-way for the Lexington and Eastern Railroad. J.H. Frazier, by the way, on Main Street, across from the courthouse, is the J.H. Frazier building built in 1914. In 1909, the Louisville and Niceville Railroad, still nursing war wounds more than 40 years before, used what its officials thought was a secretly acquired subsidiary, the L&E, to buy right-of-way and began pushing rails 65 miles from Jackson to Whitesburg. But the Hillbilly Telegraph was in full order. Before the ink was dry, everyone here knew who bought the right-of-way. Much to the railroad's surprise, it didn't meet with violence. It met with indifference from some, but it met with some mild legal resistance from others. But for the most part, the coming of the railroad was greeted with excitement. It meant that Letcher County would have a direct connection to central Kentucky, and from there to the rest of the United States and to the world. The rails came, and a second wave of immigrants came in front. African Americans from the deep south began digging tunnels and laying rails, and Italian immigrants began laying stone foundations for the trestles. Miners from Poland and engineers from the United Kingdom and Germany began opening mines and putting down roots right here in Whitesburg and throughout the region. The community of Chip, 10 miles up the rails, became a bona fide city, and its name was changed to Neon, one of the noble gases. Consolidation Coal of Pittsburgh built the entire city of Jenkins from the ground up, as well as coal camps at Fleming, McRoberts, Camden, East Jenkins, and Dunham. And Letcher County became the proverbial melting pot. Immigrants were pouring into New York through Ellis Island and spreading out across the nation, and many came here. People like Sarur Dawahiri, who came from Syria and became a pack peddler. He went from selling household needs from a backpack to building a statewide department store chain selling tailored, high-end clothing. At one time, you would have been hard-pressed to find a Kentuckian who didn't shop at Dahlhart's. There were people like Tom John, whose real name is now lost. Tom John was an ethnic Albanian from Turkey. He worked in the coal mines in Jenkins, but by 1930, he was living between August Codaspati and Sam Commodore, selling popcorn to passengers arriving at the railroad depot just down the street from here. He sold enough popcorn to build his own restaurant, the Coney Island Cafe. The Tom John building, where that restaurant was located, is still on the corner of Main Street and River Road, standing above the river on stone pillars built by his Italian neighbors. There were people from Ireland, England, Russia, Serbia, Germany, Poland, Austria, and Hungary, all in the census records for Letcher County in the early 1900s. Most of them are right here in Whitesburg. But the biggest community of immigrants here in Whitesburg was from Italy. And most of those came from your little town, dello. Sant'Andrea Apostolo dello Ionio. Sant'Andrea, for short. There were brothers Dominic, Giuseppe, and Francesco Mangiaro, who came from Sant'Andrea to New York and then West Virginia. Giuseppe, known as Joe, majority to his American neighbors, lived out his life and died in Beckley, West Virginia in 1938. But Francesco and Dominic continued to Kentucky, bringing with them their skills as stonemasons and bricklayers. Dominic went back to Italy several times, but he returned to Hazard, about 30 miles from here, and kept his family name. Francesco stayed here. He changed his name to Frank Majority, but he couldn't leave Italy behind completely. He kept his middle name, Zasso, Frank Zasso Majority, and his grandson and great-granddaughter are here with us today. There was August Codaspati, also from Sant'Andrea, and also a builder. He married Helen Polichetti. Her father, Alfonso Polichetti, while not from Sant'Andrea, also came with the railroad. He built a house for his daughter and her new husband next door to John Palumbo, who immigrated from Castle San Giorgio and built a fine Italian villa on College Hill. There was Sam Pomoderi, whose company built what is now US 119 across Pine Mountain, and his wife Caterina, and his nephew Bruno. There was Joe Romeo, who was the boss on many construction jobs around Whitesburg. Bruno Dominiani, who built the stone building across from Letcher Funeral Home. Frank Greco, Paul Ranieri, whose grandson, John Ranieri, is here with us today. They made their own little Italy on College Hill, just over there. And they left their mark chisel on this town, this county, and this entire region. Photographs taken before the arrival of the railroad and after could not be more different. We went from an agrarian village with farm fields in downtown to a city of bricks and stone and mortar. In 1900, there were only 2 brick buildings in Whitesburg, the courthouse and the house across the street owned by J.H. Frazier. By 1930, nearly every building on Main Street was masonry. It was a move pushed by town officials to protect it from fire, but it was something that could not have been accomplished without the skilled craftsmen who came here from across the water. And you'll see some of the buildings from Sant'Andrea in Dr. Voce's talk. And they could have been dropped in the middle of Whitesburg and nobody would know the difference. But what is really remarkable is not the acceptance of the new buildings and new construction methods. It's the apparent ease with which the Italian community folded into the Appalachian community. When I saw the pictures of Dr. Voce collected of the buildings in Sant'Andrea, my first thought was, well, you can really see the influence in Whitesburg. The archways, the stonework is unmistakable. But also there are subtle things here that people don't think about. The pepperoni rolls that you get at Double Quick, mandolin music, the way the Italian people who came here became such an integral part of our community. Then World War II began, and the American government and the Italian government were on opposite sides of the battlefield. I can't help but wonder if it wasn't a bit like our own Civil War. The Italian immigrants were our neighbors, our friends, and our family. Many of the second generation joined the U.S. Army, the Navy, the Marines, the Merchant Marine, and went off to fight against some of their own relatives. Some people here, of course, became upset that there was a stone in the shape of Italy on the front of the Presbyterian church. But rather than break up their friendships, rather than break up their family, the stonemasons chose to break up that stone and conceal it from view. If you know it's there, it's obvious, but it was hidden just enough that everyone was satisfied. That stone remains there today, and you can still see it. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you see the effort it took to maintain those friendships, you can't unsee that either. The Italians from Sant'Andrea left their mark in Whitesburg, and it was a good mark. I hope that the people of Letcher County also left a good mark on those who